My name is Rachel Martinez, and at 28 years old, I thought I knew everything about family loyalty. That December night at our annual year-end party, when my sister Emma stood up and declared, "They're suspended until they apologize to my partner," I had no idea those words would unravel 30 years of lies and expose the most devastating betrayal imaginable. What started as a simple family gathering became the moment everything I believed about blood trust and unconditional love came crashing down. The aftermath didn't just destroy relationships, it revealed a conspiracy so shocking that it would make me question every memory, every gesture of love, and every assumption I'd ever made about the people who raised me. But before we dive into this family revenge story that'll leave you speechless, I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a wild ride filled with betrayal, shocking revelations, and the sweetest justice you've ever seen, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this family drama that proves sometimes the people closest to you are hiding the darkest secrets. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, the Martinez family was the picture of perfection that everyone envied. Dad worked as a successful architect. Mom taught elementary school, and my older sister Emma had always been the golden child valedictorian homecoming queen. Full scholarship to Stanford. I was the creative one, the dreamer who chose art school over business, much to my parents' barely concealed disappointment. Emma had been with her partner Jordan for 3 years, and honestly, most of us were still adjusting. Jordan was transitioning, and while our family claimed to be supportive, there were always these subtle comments, the misgendering that was quickly corrected with fake apologies, the way conversations would shift when Jordan entered the society room. I noticed it all, but Emma seemed oblivious, or maybe she just chose to ignore it. The year-end party was a tradition that started when Emma and I were kids. Every December 30th, our extended family would gather at Mom and Dad's house. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, usually about 40 people crammed into our living room and backyard, sharing stories about the year and making resolutions for the next. This particular year felt different from the moment I walked through the front door. There was tension in the air, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, and Mom kept shooting worried glances at Dad. Emma arrived late with Jordan, and I could immediately tell something was wrong. Her jaw was set in that determined way that meant she was about to go to war. The evening progressed normally enough. Uncle Mike told his annual terrible jokes, Cousin Sarah showed off pictures from her European vacation, and Grandma Martinez held court from her favorite armchair, dispensing wisdom and criticism in, quote, equal measure. But I kept watching Emma. She barely touched her food, barely participated in conversations, and kept checking her phone like she was waiting for something. It was around 9 p.m. when Emma suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The room gradually fell silent as she walked to the center of the living room, Jordan standing uncertainly beside her. "I have an announcement to make," Emma said, her voice carrying that lawyer tone she'd perfected in law school. "Some members of this family have been incredibly disrespectful to Jordan, and I'm done pretending it's okay." Mom immediately started to protest. "Emma, honey, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, Mom, this is exactly the time and place." Emma cut her off. "Because apparently, some people in this room think it's acceptable to send my partner hateful messages, to deadname them behind their back, and to actively campaign for Jordan not to be included in family events." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. I looked around, trying to process what Emma was saying. Hateful messages. Campaign against Jordan. This was the first I was hearing about any of this. "That's a serious accusation, Emma," Dad said, his architect's mind, always wanting facts and evidence. "Do you have proof of these alleged messages?" Emma pulled out her phone and started reading. The messages were vicious, calling Jordan sick, perverted, saying our family was being corrupted by this transgender nonsense. The language was cruel and personal, attacking not just Jordan's identity but their character, their relationship with Emma, even their appearance. What made it worse was that the messages were coming from family phones. Aunt Linda's number. Uncle Mike's number. Even Grandma Martinez's number, though I couldn't imagine our 80-year-old grandmother sending text messages filled with such hatred. This ends now, Emma declared, her voice shaking with controlled fury. Anyone who sent these messages, anyone who participated in this harassment campaign, anyone who thought it was okay to treat my partner this way, you're suspended from this family until you apologize sincerely to Jordan and prove you've learned to be better people. The accusations flew immediately. Aunt Linda swore she never sent any messages. Uncle Mike claimed his phone had been hacked. Grandma Martinez looked genuinely confused about what text messaging even was. But Emma had screenshots, timestamps, phone records. I stood there watching my family tear itself apart, feeling like I was seeing them all clearly for the first time. The perfect family facade was crumbling, and underneath was something much darker and more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The party ended in chaos. Half the family stormed out indignantly, claiming Emma was being manipulated or had lost her mind. The other half sat in stunned silence, trying to process the accusations. Jordan looked mortified, clearly, wishing they could disappear, while Emma stood her ground with the determination of someone who'd finally decided to stop enabling toxic behavior. After everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean up. Mom was crying quietly in the kitchen, Dad was pacing the living room, muttering about family loyalty, and Emma was in the backyard with Jordan, probably trying to comfort them, after what had to be one of the most humiliating experiences of their life. "Rachel, you have to talk sense into your sister," Mom pleaded, as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher. "She's destroying our family over some silly misunderstanding." "Silly misunderstanding," I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, did you hear those messages? They were absolutely vicious." "People's phones get hacked all the time," Dad interjected, joining us in the kitchen. "This is probably just some elaborate prank or mistake." Emma's always been dramatic. But something didn't feel right about their responses. They seemed more concerned about the family's reputation than about the fact that Jordan had been receiving hate messages for months. They kept deflecting, minimizing, making excuses for people who'd supposedly been hacked or misunderstood. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the whole situation. I called Emma to check on her and Jordan, but she was tight-lipped about details. She just kept saying she had more evidence than just the text messages, and that she was done protecting people who don't deserve protection. That's when I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started with Aunt Linda, who'd always been one of my favorite relatives. I called her under the pretense of checking in after the dramatic party, but really I wanted to hear her side of the story. "Oh, honey, it's been such a nightmare," Linda said, her voice shaking. "I swear on my mother's grave I never sent those horrible messages. I don't even know how to send text messages with pictures and links like some of those screenshots showed. I still have to ask my teenage grandson to help me with my smartphone." That was a good point. Some of the messages Emma had shown included memes, links to anti-transgender articles, and sophisticated formatting that seemed beyond Linda's technical capabilities. But if she didn't send them, who did? I called Uncle Mike next, and his story was similar. He claimed his phone had been acting weird for months, sometimes showing sent messages he didn't remember sending. He'd assumed it was a glitch, or maybe his ex-wife messing with him during their bitter divorce proceedings. The more people I talked to, the more convinced I became that something larger was happening here. Too many family members were claiming innocence, and their explanations actually made sense. But if they weren't sending the messages, someone was using their phones or spoofing their numbers to make it look like they were. I started researching phone spoofing and discovered it was surprisingly easy to make messages appear to come from any number. You could download apps, use websites, even pay services to send messages that would show up looking like they came from someone else's phone. But who in our family would have the technical knowledge and the motivation to orchestrate something like this? And why would they want to drive a wedge between Emma and the rest of the family? That's when I remembered something odd. During the party, while Emma was reading the hateful messages aloud, I'd been watching everyone's reactions. Most people looked shocked or confused or angry. But there was one person who hadn't seemed surprised at all, someone who'd been quietly nodding along as if they'd been expecting this confrontation. My cousin David, Emma's childhood best friend, and the family's IT guy, had been standing in the corner with a knowing expression on his face. At the time, I'd assumed he was just proud of Emma for finally standing up for Jordan. But now I was wondering if there was more to it. David had always been jealous of Emma's success. He'd dropped out of college, bounced between tech support jobs, and still lived with his parents at 32. He'd also been making increasingly bitter comments about Emma, thinking she's better than everyone, ever since she'd started law school. More importantly, David had the technical skills to pull off something like this. He'd helped several family members set up their smartphones, had access to their accounts and passwords, and definitely knew how to spoof phone numbers and create fake messages. I decided I needed to talk to Emma about my suspicions, but when I called her, she dropped a bombshell that changed everything. "Rachel, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "The text messages weren't the only thing. Someone's been sending Jordan's personal information to their workplace, trying to get them fired. Someone leaked their dead name and before transition photos to their coworkers. Someone even called Jordan's doctor's office, pretending to be a concerned family member, trying to access their medical records. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a systematic harassment campaign designed to destroy Jordan's life and relationships, and whoever was behind it had been planning this for a long time." The revelation about the workplace harassment changed everything. This wasn't just about mean text messages anymore. Someone was actively trying to destroy Jordan's career and privacy. I knew I had to help Emma figure out who was behind this before things escalated even further. I arranged to meet Emma and Jordan at a coffee shop downtown, far away from any family members who might overhear us. Jordan looked exhausted with dark circles under their eyes and a defeated posture that broke my heart. Emma was vibrating with barely controlled rage, her lawyer instincts clearly in full protective mode. "Tell me everything," I said, sliding into the booth across from them. Jordan's story was horrifying. For the past 6 months, they'd been receiving anonymous packages at work, containing printouts of their transition timeline, old photos, and even medical information that should have been completely private. Co-workers had started treating them differently after someone left transgender hate literature in the break room with Jordan's name highlighted. Their boss had pulled them aside twice to ask about complaints that had been filed against them, though Jordan had no idea what the complaints could be about, since their work performance had always been excellent. "The worst part," Jordan said, their voice barely above a whisper, "is that whoever's doing this knows things about my life that I've only told Emma and her immediate family. They know about my childhood therapist, my original name, even the name of the doctor who prescribed my hormone therapy. This isn't random harassment, this is someone with inside information." Emma reached across the table and took Jordan's hand. "That's why I finally decided to confront everyone at the party. I was hoping the guilty person would reveal themselves somehow, maybe through their reaction or by defending the messages too strongly. But that didn't work," I pointed out. "If anything, it just made everyone more defensive." "Actually," Emma said, with a slight smile, "it worked better than you might think. Because while everyone was focused on denying they sent the text messages, I was watching for other tells." She pulled out a notebook and opened it to a page covered with observations from the party. Emma had always been meticulous, but this level of documentation was impressive even for her. David never once asked to see the messages themselves, she read from her notes. Everyone else wanted proof. Wanted to examine the screenshots. Wanted to verify the timestamps. David just immediately started talking about how easy it would be to fake messages, and how we should focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on who did what. I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's actually really suspicious." "There's more," Emma continued. "When I mentioned that someone had been contacting Jordan's workplace, David specifically asked which department and what kind of complaints were filed. Not, 'Oh my God, that's terrible,' or 'Who would do such a thing?' He wanted specific details about the harassment campaign." Jordan nodded grimly. "And remember when I mentioned that someone had somehow gotten my medical information, David immediately said it was probably a HIPAA violation and asked if I'd filed a complaint with the medical board yet. Like he was worried about getting caught, not sympathetic about my privacy being violated. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. David had the technical skills, the inside knowledge, and apparently the detailed interest in Jordan's harassment that suggested he was more involved than he'd let on. But we needed more than suspicions to prove anything. I have an idea, I said slowly. But it's going to require some acting, and it might get ugly if I'm right about David. Here's where the story takes a turn that'll leave you questioning everything you think you know about family loyalty. If you're feeling as shocked as I was, discovering the truth about my own cousin, hit that like button, because this investigation is about to expose something that'll make your jaw drop. The next revelation proves that sometimes the people we trust most are capable of the most devastating betrayals. Emma and Jordan agreed to my plan, though they both looked nervous about what we might discover. The plan was simple but risky. We'd feed David false information and see if it made its way back to Jordan's workplace or showed up in future harassment. I called David that evening, making sure to sound casual and concerned. "Hey, I've been really worried about this whole situation with Emma and Jordan. I feel so bad that someone in our family would send those awful messages." "Yeah, it's really messed up," David said, though. His tone seemed more annoyed than sympathetic. "Emma's always been dramatic, though. I'm sure this will all blow over once people calm down." "Actually, I'm not sure it will," I said carefully. "Jordan told me they're considering pressing charges for harassment and stalking. Apparently, they've been keeping detailed records of everything, and their lawyer thinks they have a strong case." There was a long pause on David's end. "Their lawyer, yeah, some high-powered attorney who specializes in LGBTQ+ discrimination cases. Jordan said they're particularly good at tracking down anonymous harassers through digital forensics." I was completely making this up, but David didn't know that. Digital forensics, his voice had gone up an octave. Something about tracing IP addresses and phone spoofing back to the original sources. Jordan said their lawyer is confident they can identify who's been behind all this harassment within a few weeks. The conversation ended shortly after that, with David making excuses about needing to go. But the plan worked faster than we'd expected. The very next day, Jordan received a panicked call at work from someone claiming to be their concerned cousin who wanted to warn them about false legal advice and suggested they drop any thoughts of pressing charges because it would only make things worse for everyone. The caller had used a voice changer app, but they'd slipped up and mentioned specific details from my conversation with David, including the phrase, "high-powered attorney," and the exact time frame I'd made up about the digital forensics investigation. We had our smoking gun. David had been behind the harassment campaign all along, and now he was scared enough to directly contact Jordan and reveal himself. But when Emma called David to confront him, his reaction was something none of us had expected. Instead of denying everything or breaking down in guilt, he laughed. "You really think you're so smart, don't you, Emma?" he said, his voice cold and mocking. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. This isn't just about me being jealous of your perfect life or not liking Jordan. This goes so much deeper than you can imagine." "What are you talking about, David?" "Ask your precious parents about the college fund that was supposed to be mine. Ask them about the family business opportunities I was passed over for. Ask them about the real reason they've always treated you like the golden child while the rest of us got scraps." The line went dead, leaving Emma staring at her phone in confusion. But David's words had planted a seed of doubt that would soon grow into the most shocking revelation of all. Because it turned out that the harassment campaign against Jordan was just the tip of the iceberg, and the real conspiracy involved betrayals that went back decades. Emma, Jordan, and I sat in stunned silence after David's cryptic phone call. His words about college funds and family business opportunities felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together yet, but something about his tone suggested we were missing a much bigger picture. "What did he mean about a college fund that was supposed to be his?" Jordan asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Emma shook her head slowly. "I have no idea. David went to community college on his own dime as far as I know. Mom and Dad always said they could only afford to help one of us kids with education expenses, and since I had better grades—" "Wait," I interrupted, a memory surfacing. "Remember when we were teenagers and David's mom, Aunt Sarah, had that huge fight with Mom and Dad? It was right around the time you were applying to colleges. They didn't speak for almost 2 years." Emma's face went pale. Oh my God, you're right. And remember how weird David got around that time. He went from being my best friend to barely speaking to me, and I never understood why. We decided we needed answers, but approaching our parents directly felt premature. Instead, I suggested we start with Aunt Sarah, David's mother, who had always been the family truth teller even when it made people uncomfortable. When I called Aunt Sarah and asked if we could meet to discuss the family situation, her immediate response was telling. It's about time someone asked the right questions. We met at her house the next afternoon. Aunt Sarah looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes, and a weariness that suggested she'd been carrying heavy secrets for years. She poured us coffee and sat down with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. Before I tell you what I know, she began, I need you to understand that I've been wanting to have this conversation for 15 years. But David made me promise to keep quiet, and I've regretted that promise every day since. She pulled out a manila folder that had clearly been prepared for this moment. Inside were financial documents, old family letters, and what appeared to be legal paperwork. When your grandfather Martinez died in 2008, Aunt Sarah began. He left specific instructions about how his estate should be divided. He set up college funds for all 4 grandchildren, you 2 girls, David and your cousin Lisa. Each fund had $50,000, enough to cover most of a state university education. Emma and I exchanged confused glances. But we never heard about David or Lisa having college funds, Emma said. That's because your parents lied to everyone. Aunt Sarah's voice was bitter. They were named as trustees of all 4 accounts, and they were supposed to distribute the money when each grandchild turned 18. Instead, they used David and Lisa's funds to pay for Emma's private university tuition and living expenses. The room felt like it was spinning. That can't be right, I said weakly. Mom and Dad would never. I have the bank statements, Aunt Sarah interrupted, sliding documents across the coffee table. They transferred David's entire fund to Emma's Stanford account in 4 installments throughout her freshman and sophomore years. They used Lisa's fund to pay for Emma's law school applications, LSAT prep, and first-year tuition. Emma was staring at the papers like they might catch fire. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop them? I tried, Aunt Sarah said, her voice breaking. When I discovered what they'd done, I confronted them immediately. They claimed it was a temporary loan, and that they'd pay David back with interest once Emma graduated and started earning a lawyer's salary. They said Emma's education was an investment in the family's future and that supporting her career would benefit everyone eventually. But they never paid him back, Jordan said quietly. Not a penny. And when David found out the truth during his senior year of high school, it destroyed him. He'd been planning to study computer science at the state university, but without the fund he couldn't afford tuition. He watched Emma go off to Stanford while he enrolled in community college, and worked night shifts at a grocery store to pay for his classes. I felt sick. No wonder David had harbored such resentment toward Emma. From his perspective, she'd stolen his future while being praised as the family's success story. There's more, Aunt Sarah continued, pulling out additional documents. Your parents also used their positions in the family business to exclude David and Lisa from opportunities that were supposed to be available to all the grandchildren. When your uncle Robert wanted to bring David into the construction company, your father convinced him that David wasn't ready, and suggested Emma might be interested in handling the legal aspects instead. The construction company had been incredibly lucrative, especially during the housing boom of the early 2000s. Emma had indeed worked there part-time during law school, earning valuable experience and networking connections that helped launch her career. So David has been watching Emma benefit from opportunities that were stolen from him for over 15 years, Jordan summarized. No wonder, he snapped. But Emma was shaking her head, studying the financial documents with her lawyer's eye for detail. Something doesn't add up here. These bank statements show the transfers, but they also show that Mom and Dad depleted their own savings accounts around the same time. And look at this, there are medical bills here for thousands of dollars. She was right. Mixed in with the college fund transfers were enormous medical expenses, insurance claims, and what appeared to be payments to specialist doctors and treatment facilities. Aunt Sarah, Emma said carefully, "What aren't you telling us?" Aunt Sarah's composure finally cracked, and she started crying. Your parents didn't steal that money for fun, Emma. They used it to pay for your sister Rachel's cancer treatment." The room went dead silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What cancer treatment?" I whispered. "You were 7 years old," Aunt Sarah said through her tears. "You had a rare form of childhood leukemia. The treatments weren't covered by insurance, and your parents were facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. They were going to lose the house, maybe even declare bankruptcy." Emma grabbed my hand across the table. "Rachel, do you remember being sick when you were little?" I did, actually. I remembered months of doctor's appointments, feeling tired all the time, and Mom crying when she thought I wasn't looking. But I'd always been told it was just childhood illness, and that I'd gotten better on my own. "They took the money from the college funds to save Rachel's life," Aunt Sarah continued. "And they were planning to pay it back, I believe that. But then, the economy crashed, your father's architectural firm nearly went under, and they never recovered financially." The revelation recontextualized everything. Our parents hadn't stolen David's future out of favoritism. They'd made an impossible choice between one child's education and another child's life. But they'd never told anyone the truth, letting family members believe Emma was simply the golden child while David and Lisa were overlooked. "Why didn't David know this?" Emma asked. "Why did you let him think our parents just chose me over him?" "Because your parents made me swear never to tell anyone about Rachel's illness," Aunt Sarah said. "Rachel doesn't even know how serious it was. They wanted to protect her from the trauma of knowing she almost died, and they wanted to protect the family from the financial stress. They thought they could handle the consequences of their decision privately. But their secrecy had created a monster." David had spent 15 years nursing a grudge based on incomplete information, believing he'd been cheated out of his future when the reality was far more complicated. "This explains the harassment campaign," Jordan said grimly. "David thought he was getting revenge against Emma for stealing his opportunities, not knowing that the money actually went to save Rachel's life." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "We have to tell him the truth. This whole situation is based on a misunderstanding." "It might be too late for that," I said, thinking about the systematic cruelty of Jordan's harassment. Even if he was operating from false assumptions, what he did to Jordan was unforgivable. And the way he's been manipulating the whole family, turning everyone against each other. Plus, Aunt Sarah added quietly, "There's something else David doesn't know. Something that might make this situation even more complicated." We all turned to stare at her. The cancer treatment didn't just save Rachel's life. The doctors discovered something during her treatment that changed everything they thought they knew about her medical history. Something that revealed another family secret that's been hidden for 21 years. Aunt Sarah's words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Another family secret. After everything we'd already discovered, I wasn't sure I could handle another revelation that would reshape my understanding of my own life. "What kind of medical discovery?" Emma asked, her voice tight with apprehension. Aunt Sarah looked directly at me, her expression filled with a mixture of sadness and sympathy. "During your cancer treatment, they had to run extensive genetic testing to determine the best course of therapy. That's when they discovered that your genetic markers didn't match what they expected, based on your family medical history." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Aunt Sarah said gently, "that additional testing revealed you're not your parents' biological daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma gasped, and Jordan reached over to steady me as I swayed in my chair. Not my parents' biological daughter. After 28 years of life, I was suddenly discovering that my entire identity was built on a lie. "That's impossible," I said weakly. "I look like Dad. Everyone's always said I have his eyes." "You do have similar features," Aunt Sarah agreed. "But that's because you're not completely unrelated to the family. The genetic testing revealed that you're actually David's half-sister." The room started spinning. David's half-sister. That meant, "Your biological father is my ex-husband David's dad," Aunt Sarah continued. "Tom and your mother had an affair in 1996, right around the time she and your father were going through a rough patch in their marriage. When she got pregnant with you, she convinced your father that you were his." Emma was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "So Rachel is actually our cousin, not our sister." "Biologically, yes. But your parents raised her as their own daughter, and they've loved her just as much as they love you, Emma. The affair was a one-time mistake that your mother has regretted for 28 years. I couldn't process the information. My whole life had been a lie. The man I called Dad wasn't my father. The woman I'd always looked up to as a moral role model had cheated on her husband and then lied about it for decades. Does David know? Jordan asked quietly. No, Aunt, Sarah said, and neither does Tom, my ex-husband. Your parents and I are the only ones who know the truth. We decided it would be better to keep it secret rather than destroy multiple families. But the implications were staggering. If David knew that I was his half-sister and that the money he thought had been stolen from him had actually been used to save his half-sister's life. This changes everything, Emma said clearly, thinking along the same lines. If David finds out that Rachel is his biological sister and that the college fund money went to her cancer treatment, he might feel even more betrayed, I finished. Because not only did our parents lie to him about the money, they also lied about our family relationships. He's been harassing his own sister's partner while thinking she was just his spoiled cousin. Aunt Sarah nodded grimly. Which is why I've been terrified this day would come. Once David started digging into family finances and asking questions about the college funds, I knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth about the medical expenses. And if he demands to see Rachel's medical records from that time, the genetic testing results would be right there, Emma concluded. We sat in heavy silence, absorbing the full scope of the family's deceptions. 3 generations of lies, hidden affairs, financial betrayals, and medical secrets had created a web of misunderstanding so complex that untangling it might be impossible. We have to tell him, I said finally. Whatever consequences come from it, David deserves to know the truth about everything. About the money, about my cancer, about our biological relationship. Are you sure? Emma asked. Once we open this door, we can't close it again. This will change our family forever. Our family is already changed forever, I pointed out. David's harassment campaign has already destroyed relationships and exposed years of resentment. The only way forward is through complete honesty. Jordan, who had been quietly listening to our family drama unfold, finally spoke up. There's something else to consider. If David has been operating from a place of perceived betrayal and injustice, learning the truth might actually diffuse his anger rather than escalate it. People can often forgive honest mistakes more easily than they can forgive deliberate cruelty. Aunt Sarah pulled out her phone. I'll call him now and ask him to come over. It's time for this family to stop running from the truth. But when she dialed David's number, it went straight to voicemail. We tried several more times over the next hour with the same result. Finally, Aunt Sarah called her ex-husband Tom to see if he'd heard from David. The conversation was brief, but when Aunt Sarah hung up, her face was pale with worry. Tom says David cleaned out his apartment yesterday and left a note saying he was taking care of some family business and might be gone for a while. He also withdrew all the money from his savings account. Emma and I exchanged alarmed glances. Taking care of family business sounded ominous, especially coming from someone who'd been systematically harassing Jordan for months. We need to call Mom and Dad, Emma said, already pulling out her phone. If David is planning some kind of confrontation, they need to be warned. But when Emma called our parents' house, there was no answer. She tried both their cell phones with the same result. Maybe they're just out running errands, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Jordan was already Googling something on their phone. There's a way to track someone's location if you have their phone number and the right app. It's not exactly legal, but given the circumstances, do it, Emma and I said simultaneously. Jordan's fingers flew over their phone screen using their tech support skills to access location services that probably should have required warrants. After a few tense minutes, they looked up with a grim expression. David's phone is showing at your parents' house, and it's been there since yesterday evening. The implications hit us all at once. David hadn't just disappeared, he'd gone to confront our parents armed with partial information about the financial betrayals, but without knowing the full truth about my cancer or our biological relationship. We have to get over there right now, Emma said, grabbing her keys. As we raced across town toward our childhood home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. David had been planning this confrontation for months, possibly years. And if he'd discovered even partial truths about the college fund situation, there was no telling what he might have done with that information. The real question was, would the complete truth about our family's secrets be enough to diffuse the situation, or would it only make David feel more betrayed than ever? When we pulled into my parents' driveway, everything looked normal from the outside. The house was well lit, Dad's car was parked in its usual spot, and there were no signs of struggle or confrontation. But something about the stillness felt ominous. Emma knocked on the front door while Jordan and I checked the windows for any sign of movement inside. There was no response to the knocking, but I could see lights on in the living room and what appeared to be several people sitting on the couch. "The back door is unlocked," Jordan called softly from the rear of the house. We entered through the kitchen, moving quietly, in case we were walking into a dangerous situation. But what we found in the living room was not what any of us had expected. David was sitting in Dad's favorite armchair, but he wasn't holding anyone hostage or making threats. Instead, he was crying. Deep, silent sobs that shook his whole body while Mom, Dad, and even Grandma Martinez sat on the couch looking like they'd been hit by a truck. "David," I said softly. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before, genuine remorse. "Rachel," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Mom stood up shakily and came over to hug me. "Sweetheart," we told him everything. "About your cancer, about the medical bills, about—" She glanced at David, "about your biological father." The conversation that followed was the most emotionally exhausting 3 hours of my life. David had indeed come to the house, planning a confrontation, armed with Aunt Sarah's financial documents and a head full of 15 years' worth of resentment. But when he demanded explanations, our parents had finally decided that the time for secrets was over. They'd told him everything. About my cancer diagnosis at age 7, about the experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, about the impossible choice between my life and his education. They'd told him about Mom's affair, about my biological parentage, and about the genetic testing that had revealed the truth during my treatment. "When they told me you were my half-sister," David said, looking directly at me, "and that the money had gone to save your life, I realized what a monster I'd become." He'd spent the night going through all the harassment he'd perpetrated against Jordan, seeing it through the lens of his newfound knowledge. Not only had he been tormenting an innocent person based on incomplete information, but he'd been attacking the partner of someone who was technically his biological sister. "I called Jordan's workplace this morning," David continued. "I spoke to their supervisor and told them that all the complaints and harassment reports were fake, that I'd been impersonating family members, and that Jordan was actually an exemplary employee who'd been the victim of a systematic campaign of lies." Jordan looked stunned. "You confessed to everything." "I confessed to everything," David confirmed. "I also called your doctor's office and admitted that I'd been trying to access your medical records illegally. I've documented every piece of harassment I perpetrated and turned it all over to a lawyer who specializes in hate crime cases." Emma leaned forward. "Why would you turn yourself in? You could face serious criminal charges." "Because I deserve to face criminal charges," David said simply. "What I did was illegal, immoral, and cruel. I spent months trying to destroy an innocent person's life because I was angry about a situation I didn't fully understand. That's not something you apologize for and move on from. That's something you take full responsibility for and try to make amends for." Over the following weeks, David followed through on his promises of accountability in ways that surprised everyone. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of harassment and cyberstalking, cooperating fully with prosecutors to ensure Jordan received justice. He liquidated his savings account to pay for therapy for Jordan to deal with the trauma he'd caused, and he donated an additional $10,000 to LGBTQ+ advocacy organizations. But perhaps most importantly, he used his technical skills to help law enforcement develop better methods for tracking down anonymous harassers. His case became a model for how digital harassment campaigns could be investigated and prosecuted, potentially helping future victims get justice more quickly. The family healing process was slower and more complex. Emma and I had to completely reevaluate our relationships with our parents, processing the reality that they'd been keeping life-altering secrets from us for decades. I had to grapple with the discovery that my biological father was someone I'd barely known, and that my entire sense of identity had been built on partial truths. But there were positive developments too. Learning about my cancer treatment helped explain some health issues I'd been having as an adult. Apparently, some of the childhood medications had long-term effects that my doctors needed to monitor. David and I began building a relationship as biological siblings, something that felt strange but meaningful. Most importantly, Jordan began to heal from the trauma of months of harassment. With David's confession clearing their name at work and his financial support paying for therapy, they were able to start rebuilding their sense of safety and security. 6 months later, Jordan and Emma got engaged. David wasn't invited to the engagement party and probably won't be welcome at the wedding, but he sent a thoughtful gift along with a letter reiterating his apologies and his commitment to continued accountability for his past actions. The letter also included something unexpected, a check for $50,000 made out to me. I can't give you back your childhood or undo the lies that were told David had written. But I can give you the college fund that was rightfully yours. I've been working extra jobs and saving every penny for 6 months to put together the amount that should have been available to you when you turned 18. It's not enough to make up for what was taken, but it's a start. I stared at that check for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice, and the complicated ways that families hurt and heal each other. David's harassment of Jordan was unforgivable, but his genuine efforts to make amends were something I'd never expected to see. In the end, I used part of the money to pay for additional therapy for me, for Jordan, for Emma, and even for our parents who were struggling to process their own guilt and regret. I used the rest to start a foundation that helps families navigate the financial challenges of childhood cancer treatment, because I learned that our situation wasn't as unique as I'd thought. This whole experience taught me that family loyalty isn't about protecting each other from consequences or covering up mistakes. Real family loyalty is about telling the truth even when it's painful, taking responsibility for your actions even when it's costly, and working to heal damage even when forgiveness seems impossible. So I want to ask you something as we wrap up this wild family revenge story that turned into something much more complex than anyone expected. Have you ever discovered that your family wasn't who you thought they were? Have you had to wrestle with forgiveness when someone you trusted betrayed you in ways that seemed unforgivable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your own stories about family karma and justice. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear about the complicated journey from betrayal to healing. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about the messy, complicated, beautiful ways that families fall apart and come back together. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster. I hope my family's story reminds you that justice doesn't always look like revenge, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it changes everything. Remember, healing is possible, accountability matters, and family is about more than blood. It's about the people who choose to love you and stand by you even after they know all your secrets. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.